It was a normal Tuesday afternoon, February 16, 1988, in Sunnyvale, California. Just before 3 p.m., a man named Richard Farley pulled up to a defense technology company, ESL Incorporated. He wasn't there to pick someone up. He was dressed for war. He wore a bulletproof. He had 2 shotguns, a rifle, and several handguns tucked into his belt. Magazines of ammunition bulged from his jacket. He carried over 1,000 extra rounds. And he was looking for one person, one target, Laura Black. This isn't a story about a stranger lurking in the shadows. This is about an obsession that bloomed in plain sight. It's about a man who wouldn't take no for an answer. And it's about what happens when the system fails to protect those who need it most. Because sometimes, the greatest threats aren't strangers at all. Sometimes, they're the people who work just down the hall. Laura Black was bright, ambitious, and just starting to chase her dreams. After graduating from college, she landed a highly sought-after job in Silicon Valley. ESL Incorporated was a defense technology company, a prestigious industry. At only 22, Laura was one of the few female engineers there. She carried herself with professionalism, determined to succeed. This was a huge milestone for her, a promising start. But what Laura didn't know was that she had caught the eye of someone working only a few feet away. Someone who, over the next 4 years, would slowly, methodically, turn her life into a waking nightmare. That someone was Richard Farley. Farley was a computer technician at ESL. He was older than most of his co-workers, in his mid-30s, when Laura started. He had joined ESL after a brief stint in the Navy, doing tech support roles. To outsiders, he probably seemed like an average, quiet, and competent employee. Maybe a little awkward, but Richard Farley harbored deeper issues. When Laura Black, young and new, arrived at the company, she became his fixation. It began with mere glances. Then he'd started making excuses to be closer to her. Soon he became completely obsessed. He truly believed that Laura was supposed to be his. At first, Laura, trying to be kind and polite, trying not to cause a fuss at her new job, brushed his behavior off as harmless flirtation. But then, he started bringing her gifts, notes, candy, even homemade baked goods, and each time, he would ask her out. Laura always declined, politely, but firmly. She wasn't interested. She barely knew him, but Farley did not take the hint. In fact, he didn't take no at all. His behavior escalated. He started appearing in places he shouldn't have been, standing in hallways right outside her office during weird hours, leaving personal notes on her desk. Then, he began sending her letters. Long, rambling messages, professing his love and obsession. He repeatedly called her office phone. Every time her phone rang, she would dread that it was him. Laura couldn't get a break. She tried to set boundaries. Repeatedly, she told Farley she was uncomfortable. She asked him to stop contacting her. When that didn't work, she finally reported his behavior to human resources. But it didn't matter. ESL was a major defense contractor with clear policies about harassment. Yet, the company did little, if anything, to protect her. It was incredibly sad. At the time, workplace stalking was not taken seriously at all, especially when there was no physical threat yet. Farley barely got a slap on the wrist. He wasn't even fired. He was simply directed to attend psychological counseling. But even that wasn't followed up in Laura. She was just told to avoid him, but Farley had no intention of being avoided. And Laura, unfortunately, knew it. Every time Laura walked through the halls of ESL, she felt the weight of his presence, watching her, following her, studying her every move. Each day, the signs became more alarming. Richard Farley's fixation didn't just persist. It metastasized into something much darker, more unstable. After she rejected him and involved HR, he began to completely unravel. His work performance declined. Co-workers noticed he seemed agitated, volatile. Sometimes, he would even mumble to himself. His obsession with Laura consumed him. He even started keeping bizarre personal records, doctored photos, notes about her schedule, imagined romantic milestones that never even happened between them. Farley consistently sent Laura messages that became more and more disturbing. Long letters, claiming they had a relationship, insisting she owed him a chance. He was delusional. He thought they were destined to be together. When Laura didn't respond, when she avoided him as ESL told her to, he completely went nuts. He accused her of betrayal, called her cruel, said he would never forget what she had done to him. Laura was growing increasingly frightened and scared. She contacted HR again. She reached out to management, security. Finally, in 1986, he was let go from ESL. Took them long enough. For a time, Laura had hope that things would just go back to normal. But unfortunately, they didn't. Even after being fired, Farley continued to stalk her. By now, he was no longer pretending to be a heartbroken romantic. He was angrier, more erratic, more threatening. He fixated on what he believed she had done to him, ruining his life, costing him his job, ignoring his love. He had become convinced that she deserved to suffer. And in 1988, that conviction turned into something far, far more dangerous. By the start of 1988, Laura Black had done everything she could think of to protect herself. She had reported Richard Farley to her employer. She had filed complaints, begged her workplace to intervene, documented his obsessive behavior, changed her daily routines. She lived in ultimate fear, but still, no real protection ever came. So, on February 2nd, 1988, she took the most serious step yet. Laura filed a temporary restraining order against Farley, citing years of harassment and her escalating fear for her life. The court granted the order. It forbade Farley from contacting her or coming near her home or workplace. A hearing was set for 2 weeks later, February 17th, to determine if the order would become permanent. This was a bold move on Laura Black's part. Extremely necessary. But for Richard Farley, this was the final trigger. After being served this restraining order, Farley did not back off. He snapped completely. In his twisted mind, Laura had now fully betrayed him. He began preparing for violence. Despite the restraining order, Farley legally purchased a new shotgun. California law, at the time, didn't automatically block firearm purchases because of a restraining order, which is insane. He also gathered weapons he already owned. Rifles with scopes, handguns, semi-automatics. He amassed more than 1,000 rounds of ammunition. His plan was already forming. He even sent a package to Laura's lawyer. Inside he claimed there was evidence of their supposed relationship. Doctored photos of him and Laura. Bizarre receipts. Rambling letters from a complete madman. But chillingly, included in the package, was Laura's garage door opener to her home. It wasn't just a deranged package. It was deliberate. Terrifying. He just wanted Laura to know that she was not safe. Laura, meanwhile, was absolutely terrified. She told friends and co-workers that she was super anxious for the upcoming court hearing, that she felt super alone, watched, and worst of all, she felt that no one could stop him if he tried to do anything. She had no idea that Farley was not planning on showing up to that hearing. He was planning something far more devastating. The day before the restraining order hearing, February 16, 1988, Laura Black was at work, like every other day, just trying to hold herself together through all this fear-ridden anxiety. Meanwhile, Richard Farley was preparing. He wasn't going to fight the restraining order in court. He wasn't going to let the system decide his fate. He was going to end it violently. That morning, Farley climbed into his motorhome and drove to Sunnyvale, California. He parked outside ESL Incorporated. He had come prepared for war. Farley wore a bullet resistant. He was armed with 2 shotguns, a rifle, and several handguns. Knives tucked into his belt, magazines of ammunition bulging from his fatigue-style jacket. His pockets overflowed with 1,000 rounds of extra cartridges and shells. This wasn't just a mass killing he was planning. It was targeted vengeance. He was only looking for one person. That one person was Laura Black. He would later claim he planned to confront Laura, and if she rejected him again, he would take his own life in front of her. But the arsenal he carried, and what followed, told a completely different story, one with premeditated slaughter. At just before 3 p.m. that day, Farley approached the entrance to ESL's M5 building. A security door blocked his path. He raised his shotgun and fired through the glass. The building erupted into chaos. Screams echoed through the halls. Phones rang. Workers dove under their desks, sprinting for exits. Others froze, unsure if what they heard was real. Farley stepped through the shattered door. He fired his shotgun at Lawrence Kane, a 46-year-old employee walking to his car. Kane died instantly. Farley then turned, pointing his weapon at another employee nearby, wounding him as he fled for cover. Inside the building, 23-year-old Buddy Williams was near the front desk. Farley walked up to him and fired at point-blank range. Williams was killed instantly. This was just the beginning. With every step Farley took, he got closer to Laura Black, taking people's lives during the process. As Richard Farley stormed into the ESL building, the hall was filled with terror. He moved methodically. He knew this building like the back of his hand. In a stairwell, he encountered another employee and shot them without hesitation. Then came the next 4 victims, 2 men and 2 women, all gunned down in the hallway. As Farley moved closer to Laura's wing, at this very moment, Laura was inside her office. She heard those gunshots. She was absolutely terrified, hearing the screams, the shotgun shells, and she knew exactly who it was. It was the person she had warned people about, the person who made her beg for help. But nothing had happened. And now, he was coming down the hallway, terrified and unable to move. Laura sat in her office and waited. She knew for sure it was Farley when he shouted her name down the hallway. Laura scrambled to barricade the door. She wedged furniture against it. But it wasn't enough. Farley reached her door. He raised his 12-gauge shotgun and fired directly into the wooden door. The blast shot into Laura's left shoulder, throwing her back on the floor. Shrapnel and pellets ripped into her chest. Some of the shrapnel punctured her lung. Blood spread across the carpet, but she didn't die. Barely conscious, Laura lay still, pretending to be dead. This decision may have actually saved her life. Farley, seeing what he had done, he had actually hit Laura Black. His obsession, his whole world, decided that was enough. She didn't necessarily need to die now. He would later state that he wanted her to remember what she had caused, which is so messed up he didn't fire at Laura again. Instead, he continued his rampage. More employees were wounded. Some shot through doors. Others hid in closets and under desks. A few even jumped from windows to escape. Richard Farley was still inside, armed and mobile. Meanwhile, Laura Black was bleeding, dazed, gasping for breath. She clutched her shoulder to slow the bleeding, drifting in and out of consciousness. For the moment, Richard Farley was still in control of that building. At approximately 3:15 p.m., alarms blaring, the building under siege, Richard Farley called the police himself. When he did, his voice was calm. He said to the 911 dispatcher, "I'm the one who's been wasting people." He described what he had done. He blamed Laura Black and the restraining order for pushing him over the edge. "It's absolutely insane." Then came the threat. If the police came any closer than 300 yards, he would begin killing hot. Thus began a 5-hour standoff. SWAT teams positioned snipers. Farley was in the building, ready to wreak havoc. Snipers tried to find him, but he kept moving. It was difficult to get a clean shot. Lieutenant Ruben Grielva, a trained police negotiator, made contact with Farley by phone. For hours, Ruben engaged the killer in conversation, navigating his mood swings from rage to self-pity to eerie detachment. Farley never expressed any remorse. He claimed the people he shot, besides Laura, were simply in his way. But he did say one thing that stood out. He had hoped that Laura Black had actually survived, because he wanted her to remember what she had caused. Meanwhile, Laura had actually regained consciousness despite the immense pain and a collapsed lung. But she stayed in her office, quiet and hidden, terrified that he might return to finish her off. Eventually, other survivors helped Laura move to a safer location, but the standoff dragged on. By 4:30 p.m., negotiators convinced Farley to let a rescue team into the building to help wounded survivors. Several people, including Laura, were rushed out to waiting ambulances. Still, Farley yapped. He mentioned slurs. He said he wanted to gloat a little before giving up. He even bragged about having enough ammo to fight for 2 more hours. On top of being a psycho stalker killer, he was narcissistic as hell. Finally, as darkness fell, Farley made an unexpected demand. Quote, "I'll come out if you get me a number 26 sandwich from the deli, turkey, ham and cheese, and a Diet Pepsi." The police agreed. I have no words. At 8:30 p.m., Richard Farley laid down his weapons and exited the building with his hands raised. SWAT officers swarmed him and arrested him on the spot. But inside ESL, the aftermath looked like a complete war zone. 7 people were dead, 4 others had been shot. But Laura Black was alive. And now, finally, so was the truth. In the weeks and months following the massacre at ESL, the community struggled to process what had happened. The name Laura Black became known far beyond the walls of Sunnyvale Office Park. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a symbol of resilience, of missed warning signals, and of a system that failed to act in time. Laura spent 19 days in hospital, recovering from gunshot wounds. She underwent multiple surgeries, but despite all the fear and trauma, she decided to testify at Farley's trial. Richard Farley was ultimately convicted on 7 counts of first-degree murder, among numerous other charges. He was sentenced to death in 1991. He still remains on California's death row to this day, having exhausted most of his appeals. Throughout this whole process, he never expressed any genuine remorse, continuing to blame his actions on everyone but himself. Just a genuine piece of, But Farley's violence had a consequence he could never have predicted. It actually changed the law. At the time of the shooting, stalking was not a specific crime. Restraining orders were often ineffective. In Farley's case, the restraining order hadn't even prevented him from legally purchasing firearms. That oversight, and the overwhelming public outrage that followed, sparked rapid change. In 1990, California became the first U.S. state to pass an anti-stalking law, making credible threats and repeated harassment criminal offenses. That law soon became a model for the nation, and within just a few years, every state in the U.S. had passed similar legislation. As one court commissioner bluntly put it, quote, "Pieces of paper do not stop bullets." So, the new laws aimed to give those pieces of paper some teeth, providing legal recourse for the victims, and earlier intervention for authorities before violence could erupt. I think people need to be encouraged to take action if they're being stalked. In the years since the attack, Laura Black rebuilt her life. She even returned to ESL, then later continued her engineering career elsewhere. Quietly, but persistently, she became an advocate for workplace safety and stalking awareness, sharing her story to help train law enforcement, employers, and mental health professionals on the warning signs that were missed in her case. In the end, Laura Black's case is not just one of survival, but transformation. From targeted victim to national advocate, her experience helped ensure that future victims might not have to suffer the same fate, and that stalking would never again be dismissed as harmless infatuation. It's a stark warning. The greatest threats aren't always strangers lurking in the dark. Sometimes, they're people we once trusted. Sometimes, they wear a uniform, and sometimes, they just sit down the hall. This story highlights something chillingly important. Your gut feeling is real. If something feels off, if someone makes you uncomfortable, if you're being harassed, speak up. Don't dismiss it, because ignoring the subtle signs can have devastating consequences. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you think the system has improved enough since 1988? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this story compelling, please like and share it to help raise awareness. Stay safe out there. I appreciate you all so much. I'll see your beautiful face in the next video.